little sweetheart.
They can't do nothing because I tap dance.
This is WVCR 88.3 FM, The Saint. You are listening to Calling Out Controversy, featuring hosts Andrew Hecht and Justin Kenyon. Hey everybody, this is Andrew Hecht. Thank you for joining me tonight. I'm with a new time, a new place. It's now Tuesdays at 11. I hope you got my message Saturday night when you tuned in, telling you to come back tonight. Thank you, listeners, for keeping us so much in business, because you know what? Now we got an hour.
Well, the sign says that it's 4 quarters for an hour, but a quarter only gets you 15 minutes. Yeah. So if my math is correct, that's not an hour.
That's not an hour.
But
it is.
We got a better time slot, and people can hear us all around the world if they're tuning in through iHeartRadio or Siena College Online Radio. Now, big thing. Today, I am joined with my new co-host, Justin Kenyon.
Hey, Andrew.
And Justin has been on the show previously, but you know what? Now he's going to be a semi-permanent fixture because he's here with me all summer long. And then he's going on a
study abroad trip to Belgium. So I'll be gone in the fall.
Yeah,
but I'll be back in the spring.
Exactly. So he's going to be here just long enough to warrant a vacation. And then he's going on said vacation, leaving me to find somebody else. Again, why do people always leave me? My life is very sad.
I am tired.
Moving on.
Very tragic.
So today, we're going to be discussing judges, court packing, and presidential nominees. Then we're tackling the Yemen war and the veto that just occurred this previous week.
Yep.
And we're going to be talking about Denver, Colorado, and its decriminalization of mushrooms, or psilocybin as it's chemically known, in the scientific community.
Yeah.
So, when it comes to current events, this past week has been very interesting. We had several kind of weird stories, right?
There are a few weird ones that kind of like stuck out.
Just awkward stuff that's been happening. But on the good side, moving very quickly through court, the shooter at Shabbat of Poway was charged with over 100 counts of hate crimes and stands trial, I think, later this week or early next week.
All right.
So that is one nice piece of news, that justice is going to be quick with that unfortunate act of violence. And moving on to more fun things, you have...
Well, Canada basically is saying that its rise in house prices was due to money laundering. So...
What?
Yeah, it's like a 5% increase in the price of housing or whatever to buy houses was deemed to be due to money laundering.
Okay, so we can cover that at a later time when there's more information on it. But hey, if you're listening right now and your thing is Canadian housing prices, why don't you write to us or email us? Or
it's a very riveting topic.
Yeah, I kind of want to know more on how money laundering
very
causes a 5% increase. Now, going back to America and foreign relations, we have Kim Jong-un sending out a statement last week saying that he would like the United States to improve their relationship with North Korea by sending former NBA Hall of Famers to visit North Korea, basically for his pleasure. On the list, obviously, Dennis Rodman, his good old buddy, and Michael Jordan, among other people.
I said, what? She said, yeah.
So that happened. Justin, what's next?
Well, Patrick Shanahan might be nominated to be the new Secretary of Defense. He's been interim since January, ever since General James Mattis stepped down for being the Secretary of Defense, so we'll see how it goes for him.
Okay, and, last week, obviously, Chinese negotiations occurred on Thursday. We're waiting for more information on that. We'll definitely tackle it probably next Tuesday. But today, we are looking at judges and court packing and presidential nominees. So to start us today, we're going to have Justin here. Tell us a little bit about what court packing is and what presidential nominations mean for our judicial system. So what's up, man?
Well, right now we got it happening on both sides pretty much. I mean, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, is trying to turn the judiciary system red. And we see that with him right now with his two nominees, or also Trump's nominees for the Supreme Court, in Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. And we also see him with him taking debate time for these judges from 30 hours per judge to 2 hours, to try to speed up the debate time, to try to basically get it going faster, to turn it into almost an assembly line of judges.
Did you just say from 30 hours to 2 hours?
Yeah.
So, like, taking it down by 97%, basically?
Yeah, 28 hours off debate time. And then also right now you see nominees for the Democratic president primary candidates, saying that they want to add judges onto the Supreme Court. The number varies with each nominee. I mean, like, I knew like Buttigieg says like 15. Others have other ways of saying it. And then you have just basically depends on which candidate you talk to.
So their idea is that they should increase the number of judges on the Supreme Court in order to counter the what's being called a conservative swing of judges throughout this past term.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, also, well, mainly this is mostly on the Supreme Court, but right now the Roberts Court has pretty much a conservative majority.
See, now, I don't understand how that can be assumed, considering Roberts and the newly appointed Kavanaugh have both been swinging rather liberally in recent decisions. Now, at the same time, I don't believe we should talk about the court in terms of right and left or Democrat and Republican.
Well, that's the way it is nowadays, too. I mean, like, Anthony Kennedy, before Kavanaugh took his seat, was the swing vote. I mean, just like with the gay marriage decision, Kennedy was the swing vote for that.
Right, and I agree that there are biases in terms of belief systems and what's supposed to be expected of appointed judges, but the whole idea of the Supreme Court being independent of the executive and legislative branches.
It's supposed to be a check on power and everything.
Right, but it's also not supposed to be politicized. And what has been happening, and what we talk about a lot in our classes, as well as between you and me, is that they are appointing people for political reasons.
They're also like barring people and all the other stuff for political reasons as well. They're trying to stop them.
And you see that with Gorsuch and Merrick Garland.
Well, like Mitch McConnell basically says that like not allowing Merrick Garland to come to the Senate to get a vote and everything was his most consequential decision as majority leader.
And that's wrong, because you're not supposed to have that. If the nominee comes up, then the nominee should be put in.
Well, he also said that,
barring circumstances.
Yeah, well, he also says that you can't really have a nominee during a presidential election year.
Again, that's...
He says it's because of tradition, that you have to go back to like the 1880s or 1890s.
If that's tradition and there's validity behind that, I mean, I don't know enough about nomination tradition to say that he's lying. But if there is a tradition there, then yeah, you should uphold the tradition. Now, obviously, the last two Supreme Court judges that have been appointed under the Trump administration. They're highly controversial. You can see that with Kavanaugh. We've covered that on the show previously. But it doesn't make sense that we should go through all this trouble in terms of picking candidates that serve a conservative bias or a liberal bias. You should be picking the best judge.
Well, I mean, the last two Senate Majority Leaders, Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell, have both gone nuclear on this topic, taking away the 60 vote to just a vote of 50 or 51.
And who did that, McConnell or Reid?
Both did. Reid with lower level judges and McConnell with the Supreme Court. McConnell said that Reid would regret the decision. He also basically kept on setting up filibusters, which is basically a tool in the minority, to basically hinder Reid getting these judges through and everything.
Yeah, I understand the filibuster, and I think our listeners, if they've ever heard of Ted Cruz, have or probably should look up when he filibustered using green eggs and ham. It's quite funny. Not that that's supposed to be comical.
I mean, Rand Paul talked about James Bond during his filibuster.
Well, yeah, a filibuster doesn't qualify what you have to say.
You just basically keep on talking to stop the Senate from moving.
Right. So when it comes back to court packing, though, Buttigieg said 15. He wants 5 Republican judges, 5 Democrat judges, and 5
to be approved by the other judges, but it has to be unanimous, according to him.
Right, and that's kind of where he clearly doesn't understand the fact that Supreme Court justices are not supposed to have political affiliations when being appointed. Like,
Well,
we
don't
know
tell him that because he says he's an intellectual. So
right, but like we know, obviously, Clarence Thomas is a conservative. We
Yeah.
know that when Scalia was around, he was a conservative. When Rehnquist was around, he was a conservative. We know these things.
yeah, well, I mean, like,
But you're not supposed to go looking for their replacements. You're not supposed to be going, oh, we need a conservative. You would need a constitutionalist, someone who believes in the literal word-to-word interpretation of the Constitution.
Well, I mean, that also comes down to whether or not they believe that the Constitution is set by the founders and it should stay as it is as the founders, or is it a living, breathing document?
Exactly. So when you take that and you say, is it either set or is it living and breathing, you end up in these discussions where in class we have like Scalia and Thomas who say the Constitution's colorblind, right?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the Constitution has the 3/5 compromise.
Yeah.
So it can't be colorblind. But if you have a 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, which we added to the Constitution,
Yeah.
and we then say all men are created equal applies to minorities as well,
Yeah.
particularly Black Americans, then it becomes a colorblind document. However, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sotomayor and Breyer and that section of the court has argued even recently that color blindness doesn't apply to the Constitution, completely disregarding. So it's they take the original Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Sorry to interrupt, but they take that and say, oh, this means it's not colorblind. This means that we have a racial divide problem in America still today. And it kind of just goes, okay, well, what about the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment then? Like, you're disregarding those things if you're saying that the Constitution is still not intrinsically equal.
Yeah, well, it's also their same thing with the Second Amendment, too, where they're kind of just like, oh, well, I mean, have you ever seen that video? They're kind of like, this is what guns were like when the Constitution was written, where it's just a guy walking into an office with a musket.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, like, this is what firearms were like when the Constitution was written. So they're kind of just like, oh, this only applies to muskets, not full-on, like, semi-automatic rifles and pistols and everything.
Sure. Yeah, I've seen that, yeah. And that's silly because I think the Founding Fathers were smart enough men to understand that warfare evolves, considering that they lived between the times of sticks and swords and then eventually guns with rifling. Wasn't rifling invented like less than 30 years before the revolution kicked off?
I don't know the exact date, but I know gunpowder was invented by the Chinese like centuries before that.
Yeah. I mean, the concept of rifling means that if you shoot a ball of lead through a rifle, it'll stay straighter. Whereas, like, during the Revolution, I believe most guns weren't rifled, and they were
muskets.
But they had like a 30-yard range before
something
it
like that. And
curved
you also had to reload them after every single shot. I mean, like, also Washington himself also changed warfare, because before Washington, they didn't go after officers. They didn't shoot officers out of respect, and then Washington started commanding his men to shoot officers, and that's one thing that changed warfare thanks to George Washington. Yeah,
and there's also the don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes, which is a archaic way of fighting where people would walk straight at each other.
Well, I mean, people used to go and just watch the battles.
Yeah, it was before the revolution, it was like a nobleman's honorable war. It was an event to see whose kingdom was stronger.
Yeah,
that's not how we do things anymore.
Then
obviously,
it turned to revolutions.
Yeah, but going back to 2A and going back to
the Constitution
and all that,
and all that other stuff.
It's silly to think that the Founding Fathers didn't foresee warfare evolving. That's so dumb.
Well, I mean, like, all of them. I mean, like, if you look at their backgrounds, like, Washington kind of changed military tactics. Benjamin Franklin changed science and diplomacy and everything. Like, they were all, like, forebearers of many other revolutions themselves.
Right. Now, to get back to applying this to the court, the way these judges interpret the Constitution and the way they interpret the law vary per judge. Obviously, you have liberal-leaning judges. Obviously, you have conservative-leaning judges.
Yeah.
You have constitutionalist judges. You have judges who interpret the Constitution as opposed to reading it word by word. And it's
You also have judges who are considered like swing votes or whatever, like Kennedy was.
yeah, and then you have obviously the power of judicial review, where somehow we gave the courts power to make law, and they have all these tests that they set for themselves to try and prove what is the best way to decide cases.
Yeah.
These are all intricacies in the courts. Adding 5 members and then splitting them up by political affiliation is not going to help this at all.
It's only going to make it worse.
It's certainly not going to make it better, but it's also saying, you're on this team, and if you have a difference of opinion, you're probably going to be shushed out of making it known.
Well, I mean, also one thing that helps these judges like become more politicized is that if you look at, and Justice Roberts shows this too, or talks about this, is that if you look at the vote counts for what each judge got for when they were approved to be a Supreme Court justice,
Yeah.
I mean, just look at like the newest judges have closer votes, but the later judges, besides with the exemption being of Clarence Thomas due to Anita Hill and all that stuff,
Yeah.
have much more approval.
Yeah, it's because there used to be an idea of if the president decides to nominate these people, we still respect the office of the president enough to just let it go.
Well, I mean, also then you have the Robert Bork situation too.
What's that?
You aren't familiar with Bork?
No.
It became a whole entire adjective where like they borked his seat. Brett Kavanaugh sits in the Bork seat. It was like when the Democrats in the Congress thought that Robert Bork was too extreme. He was Solicitor General of the United States at one point. He was also when Archibald Cox was investigating Richard Nixon.
Okay, pause.
Yes.
What year is this taking place?
In the 1980s.
This is the 1980s. Archibald Cox investigated Richard Nixon.
Yes, in the 60s, but
Okay.
he was involved in politics back then, and Richard Nixon told him to fire Archibald Cox, which he said the president had authority to do so, but then he did it, and then after Nixon fired him, he left because he said he felt uncomfortable.
So to clarify, at one point, Bork was the Solicitor General,
Yes.
and Nixon told him to fire Archibald Cox for investigating him.
Yeah.
And then Bork did that.
Bork allowed him to.
Bork allowed him to.
Yeah, he was fired, and then like Archibald, because he said he had the authority to do so since he was president.
Okay.
And then he left after that, resigned because he said he felt uncomfortable by the situation.
Okay, so he kind of just allowed Nixon to evade getting caught once and then resign.
Yeah, unitary executive theory, that whole shebang. But then after that, Ronald Reagan nominated him to become a Supreme Court justice, and then the Democrats, it then became an adjective called Bork after his name.
Bork or Borking, I would assume.
Yeah.
Okay, and why is that relevant?
They said his views were too extreme and everything, and they stopped him from getting the seat. And then after Reagan then pulled him back, he then nominated Anthony Kennedy.
Okay, so what you're saying is that kind of how we have these close these close approval ratings for
Close
the confirmation
vote
of Supreme Court
confirmations.
justices.
Because also now we have closer majorities in the Senate.
Yeah.
Where if you look back, like the Democrats held like the House of Representatives for like 40 years, for example, from 1954 to 1994.
Okay.
And now if you look recently, you see only the majority being held in the Senate by 1 or 2 seats, where for decades before that, they would have supermajorities and everything, with the only exception recently being from 2008 to 2010 when the Democrats held a supermajority in the Senate.
So basically what you're saying is it's super polarized.
Yeah.
It's almost
so
50-50.
For either side can win the majority any time. Where back in like the 50s or 60s, when like let's say Lyndon Johnson was Senate Majority Leader, Republicans would have to work with Democrats in order to even be relevant. Where now either side can be the majority at any time, they don't really have the necessity to work with each other due to that.
Well, there's also a good thing about not having a supermajority, which is in today's world, a supermajority is so much more detrimental. I mean, even going back to Johnson with their, Utopian Society program? Great Society when he was president and all the things they allowed him to get away with doing. That was awful. I mean, not that it didn't yield some good results in the form of integration, but like the busing programs didn't work except in small areas in, I think, Kentucky.
Well, I mean, also like
one
that
of the places
was
where it was beneficial
for presidents. That was also in style during that time because you had like the New Deal. Kennedy has his thing, and then Truman has his thing. Like it was basically in style.
Well, the New Deal was before World War II.
Yeah, I know that.
Truman then had his thing right after World War II, and then Kennedy, which is a president and a half later, they had
and then
the what am I thinking?
Yeah, they all had these
Civil Rights Act.
They all had these big things. Like even Teddy Roosevelt had a square deal. Like this was like in style for them to do like these big things.
Well, Teddy Roosevelt's like what 100 years before Lyndon Johnson?
60 some odd. Teddy Roosevelt was 1901 to 1909. Johnson was 1964 to 1968.
Yeah, for some reason I thought he was before that. Anyways, back to
1963.
the judges. When it comes to court packing, though, it doesn't pan out. There's no real reason to. Some people said it was at 9, then went up to 10, then went back down to 9. If it went back down to 9, that means there's too many judges past 9.
Well,
And
I mean, also
that is enough evidence.
having
for me
the
to say
odd
stop
number
doing
of
it.
judges, especially when you're doing a vote system like the Supreme Court is, makes it easier to have a winning vote.
Yeah, and a swing vote.
Yeah.
And that's important. And I also don't like the idea of politicizing the Supreme Court because, like I said earlier, it makes it harder for them to have a deference of opinion. Now,
Yeah.
the other thing we wanted to talk about on courts while we have you on the subject is the presidential nominations of lower courts and how Mitch McConnell is working very, very hard to pack the circuits.
Yeah, well, I mean, like Mitch McConnell now, like I said earlier, has taken debate time on these judges from 30 hours to 2 hours. So basically, he'd made another big move to get these judges and create basically a conveyor belt or assembly line to get more and more judges through to make the judicial branch red. This has been Mitch McConnell's plan ever since he became, or even before he became the new Senate Majority Leader.
So this plan is basically to make sure that there's more conservative judges sitting on lower courts. That way, more decisions are made before they hit the Supreme Court in favor of what you would consider a conservative response.
Yeah, I mean, he wants to turn the judicial branch of the government red. He wants to turn it conservative. That's his MO. That's his thing. That's what he's been looking to do. You could see inklings of it before he was majority leader when he was minority leader, but now it's just in full swing.
Has there ever been a push like this by another Senate majority leader?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, we have to look more into that, but not that I'm aware of at this point in time.
It's very interesting because, to be honest, I like the way it's correcting. I'm not conservative. If you know the show and you know me, then you know that's not true. So I'm not conservative, and I don't lean left either. I'm straight up libertarian. And what I like about it is how the liberal agenda, or the leftist agenda, if you believe it's more extreme, has infiltrated schools and education and kind of has the masses indoctrined on this type of thinking, this pro-socialism, everybody's a winner, happy trophy day, like
participation trophies.
Yeah, but like also the fact that everybody needs to be included in everything all the time, and if not everybody has the same stuff, then they're not equal. Like that level of thinking has pervaded through the entire American educational system.
Yeah.
Almost entirely through public schools, some holdouts in private education. But that is being counterbalanced by the fact that you're now going to have conservative judges. So while the citizens are going to be out here doing certain things when they commit crimes or when they put through new legislation, the circuits are going to be able to correct it. It's a self-correcting mechanism.
There already are people who are like upset with judges like blocking stuff, like with Trump's travel ban or whatever. Like you keep on hearing the complaints of the liberal Ninth Circuit or whatever. And then you also hear like with like them packing judges to get through legislation. I mean, this even goes back to FDR when he tried doing it to help the New Deal. It was like basically the only big thing during that time that he got beat on.
What, he wasn't able to pack the courts?
Yeah. That was the one thing he couldn't get the Senate to do and to approve.
And yet somehow the New Deal went through.
Yeah, well, I mean, he has to, like, they also figured out is that this has to be through legislation. Like, the president can't just go, like, I'm going to add judges to the Supreme Court. It has to be through legislation. And that was the one thing that he couldn't be a deal maker on, was getting them to add judges to the Supreme Court. Where even his vice president, John Nance Garner, at the time, his first vice president, told him, you don't have the judges, you're beat. Give up.
Well, I mean, history played out the way it played out. Was he appointing circuit court judges, though, at the same time?
I'm not aware. I only know about the Supreme Court packing.
No. Yeah, so far where we stand in this country, President Trump has appointed 111, I believe, is the correct number. 111 confirmed judges throughout federal and state courts.
Yeah, there's going to be more that are going to be nominated soon, too.
Yeah, and I'm kind of, like, impressed with how many that is, because while everyone else is talking about all the crap that he does on Twitter, all the weird things that he's doing with like pulling out of Paris when he first got in office, pulling out of the Iran deal, and all the nonsense that he's been running around that people want to focus in on. The judges are the important part. The judges are the part that everyone should be paying attention to.
Well, I mean, you can also argue that's more McConnell than him, too.
Well, I mean, I have a lot of respect for Mitch McConnell because he's a powerful politician, and he's a very smart politician, a very good leader.
He's a tactician, and he knows how the Senate rules work more than anybody else, because the Senate's a living, breathing thing, unlike the House of Representatives.
Yeah, his ability to navigate politics and get things done when other people can't, and what he's shown in the last 4 years now, almost 4 years, that he's been Senate Majority Leader for the president, it's impressive, dude.
Yeah.
It's impressive.
I mean, he definitely knows what he's doing.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break. Thank you for joining us. We're changing up topics when we come back. So here's a quick sponsorship by WVCR 88.3 FM, The Saint. And you know what? Stay tuned, listeners. Stay tuned. Everybody, thanks for staying tuned. I'm still Andrew. This is still Justin, and we're still calling out controversy. Now, we just got done spending 15 minutes on judges, court packing, presidential nominees, and a whole bunch of side work along with it. So now we're changing topics, and we're going to be talking about the Yemen war and the veto that came through on helping Saudi Arabia fight the Yemen war, which was last week, I believe.
Somewhere around that time, yeah.
Okay. So let me give you a little background information on the civil war over in Yemen. It's been going since 2014, so this is 5 years in now. And what happened is a Houthi insurgency group, which is Shiites who have ties to Iran, took control of Yemen's capital in Sana'a, and they asked for lower fuel prices and a new government. Well, negotiations under those terms didn't quite work, and in early 2015, they seized the presidential palace and took out President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi and his government and forced them to resign. Now, later that year, Saudi Arabia then got together a bunch of Gulf War states and led a counterforce complete with economic isolation and airstrikes. The U.S. at the time, who was fighting terrorism in that area, helped them with intelligence and logistical support. Now, as of 2016, Houthis and former President Saleh had instilled a political council to govern most of northern Yemen, but out of Sana'a. And at the same time, you had peace talks kind of come to a close between the Saudi Arabian-led forces and the Houthi. And Hadi had then been asked to evacuate Yemen and has since been residing in Saudi Arabia since 2017. Now, in 2017, around the same time, Saleh broke the truce with the Houthi and then ordered his supporters to counter the Houthi insurgents and attack. And shortly after, which was exactly 2 days, the Houthis had murdered him and all of his supporters. We, the United States, like I said, are already fighting terrorism in the form of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State in Yemen. There are 22.2 million Yemeni citizens that need assistance. There are 16,200 casualties since 2015, and there are 2 million displaced Yemenis people. This is considered by CFR, which is the Council of Foreign Relations, to be the world's worst humanitarian crisis of our time. All sides have violated human rights and international humanitarian law. Now, that being said, here's where we are. Justin, what do you think?
Well, with the veto especially, it's it's definitely tragic what's going on in Yemen right now, but more or less of the veto, along with President Trump, it's more or less just international chess. Where it was the same thing with Jamal Khashoggi when he was murdered, and everybody was saying, like, oh, we can't really give aid to Saudi Arabia and everything. Where with that, it's kind of just, although they might be terrible people or whatever, like, we all have that person that, like, they seem to be terrible people or whatever, but we keep them around for some reason, one way or another, whether it be they supply us with something or they do something for us in some way. So we all know somebody like that, and that's basically what's taking place on the world stage, where we don't want to lose Saudi Arabia because they're more of a strategic ally more than anything else. So like when the Iranian Revolution happened, we still need an ally in the area other than Israel. And so we went to Saudi Arabia and they became our ally after the Iranian Revolution. So the other main reason is that we don't want Saudi Arabia to go to Russia and China, which is where they'll probably go if they lose our support. So Bernie Sanders sponsored a bill to stop all U.S. aid of this military effort, and it was passed by both the House and the Senate, and then President Trump vetoed it. It was basically, I believe, his second veto.
Okay.
So his first veto was the override of the national security, or the national emergency, and then this was his second veto, I believe. So it's pretty much just world chess and pretty much just like a proxy war in the Middle East, because like Iran's backing one side and Saudi Arabia's backing another, kind of like the proxy wars we saw back in the Cold War, just now taking place in the Middle East.
Well, I think it's certainly important to know that the U.S. and Iran have not been friends since 1978. And
True.
We, at the same time, like you said, have been friends with Saudi Arabia since roughly the same period.
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily have a responsibility to them to help, but
It's not that we have a responsibility. It's more or less just keeping the relationship strong with them because we don't want them to go to other powers.
Right, but at the same time, we've already assisted logistical support and intelligence to help them combat the Houthi in Yemen.
Yeah.
So continuing to support them in that facet without expending American lives or an overexertion of American dollars does seem to benefit us. I think that would be how the president was thinking, or how his military council was thinking when they said that, you should veto this bill.
Yeah.
Because people hear foreign aid in terms of a military effort, and they immediately assume it means troops on the ground.
Yeah.
But we haven't put any troops on the ground in Yemen regarding the Yemeni civil war. We've been fighting Al-Qaeda and
ISIS
the Islamic State.
And all the other Islamic extremist groups.
Right. Now, it's important that we discuss Iran because Iran has not made a friend of the United States. It hasn't made a friend of Israel. We just put the Revolutionary Guard on a terrorist list, which is the first time any country's military has ever been considered a terrorist group. So our relationship with Iran is getting progressively worse. It does make sense for us to then support Saudi Arabia if the Houthi are being supported by Iran.
I mean, kind of similar to when Qatar was kind of like isolated by the rest of the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Middle Eastern countries, for allegations of supporting terrorism, such as like Taliban and everything, for financing them and everything through back channels and everything. So they were cut off and everything. So it kind of just stems to this whole entire like Middle Eastern Cold War thing that we see coming on now, pretty much, with terrorism and which sect of Islam you practice, kind of just like all that fun stuff, so we'll say.
Well, when it comes to sectionality of religion, considering the majority of Middle Eastern states are theocracies, you have only one Shiite state, which is Iran.
Yeah.
So it's not a far leap when you see a Shiite extremist group.
Well, I mean, it's also
like trace back to find Iranian backing. That's happened with Hezbollah. It's happening with the Houthi.
Yeah.
It's not an uncommon feature.
Well, I mean, Iran
that,
might be the
area.
only Shiite state, but it's not the only like country that has Shiites. I mean, Iraq is made up of 3 ethnic groups of Kurds, Sunnis, and Shiites.
Well, Kurds are an ethnic group. Sunnis and Shiites are Islamic sects. They're not ethnic.
Sorry, I misspoke on that. But like 3 different groups. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. However, the point that I'm making is that Iran is known for doing this type of shtick.
Yeah.
They're known for embracing this extremist type activity in other Middle Eastern countries. And it's upsetting because Yemen was pretty stable for a long time. Then they got rid of their...
ever since 1990, when they were reunified after one side was, I believe, held by the Soviet Union, the other side was held by like democracies, countries like the United States and others.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, when Salah was taken out of power and President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi became the new president of Yemen, things were a little unstable.
Yeah, naturally.
Right, but for the most part, it was going well until 2014. And it's sad to see that the country's in such a devastating state. You have similar situations where in Syria, the Assad
Yeah,
regime
with
was
Bashar
back.
al-Assad.
Yep, they had a similar problem, although it didn't last nearly as long.
You have it with Maduro even in Venezuela right now.
Yeah, taken it to the other side of the globe, you have Maduro. So these types of things are common, but they shouldn't be. And it's also, I think, up to us as a power that has a vested interest in that area, not to necessarily send troops, but to back someone that we're claiming is our ally. Either you help your allies or you don't. You don't sit there and go, "Oh, we're fair-weathered friends here." I understand that it's chess, but we've already made the move to say we're going to provide you intelligence and logistical support, and then to propose a bill to say, "Oh, let's just get the hell out of here. Let's not worry about it," is kind of double-faced, which we're known for being in that area. So doubling down on that isn't exactly a good idea. So I think the president was right by vetoing.
Well, it was all power of the War Powers Act to give Congress more authority over the military. But anyway, even in the Constitution, the president is referred to the commander in chief, so he has the power to do so anyway. It's just Congress trying to rein in control on the military from the president.
Yeah, and that's how a domestic issue or a domestic squabble can affect international affairs.
Yeah,
which is not healthy.
No, it's not healthy at all, and it just comes into congressional bickering that can affect how international relations are.
So, where do you stand on the presidential power of the military? Do you think that he should retain the power? Do you think Congress should be the ones making these decisions?
Well, I definitely believe the president should hold on to the power, because if you think about it, with Congress, you have multiple people, hundreds of people, debating whether or not to do an action. Well, the president is only one person with a couple of advisors who can make the decision much faster. And also, it's even laid out in the Constitution that he's the commander-in-chief himself. It's just that Congress has certain powers, but the president in that battle will always win due to that.
I agree with you. I also think it's worth noticing that the president has chief advisors for the military. He has chief counsels for the military.
Joint Chiefs of Staff are the main ones. I mean, before Goldwater-Nichols, the Joint Chiefs of Staff did have some military roles, but after Goldwater-Nichols, which restructured the Pentagon, they became more advisors.
Right, and that's important because Congress doesn't have that type of body. They don't have those advisors, and a lot of members of Congress, especially nowadays, have not served in the military, did not wish to serve in the military.
No. Unless if they were drafted. Or if you're Richard Blumenthal, you lie about it until you get caught.
Yeah, shout out to Connecticut.
Yeah, you got a dirtbag senator. Sorry about that.
No. I hate him too.
He's one of the most despicable men in Congress.
That's fair. I don't know how much we're allowed to slander a guy on the radio, so we're gonna stop now. But what's the next topic? The next topic is mushrooms. Hey, look
Andrew's
at that. We got drugs on the radio.
topic.
Finally got to do an episode on drugs. I've been waiting for this for 12 weeks because my boss was like, "You're not allowed to talk about drugs on the radio." But it's made the news. So here's what's up. Denver, Colorado is the first place in the country with officially decriminalized psychedelic mushrooms.
Yeah. By ballot initiative.
Yeah, by ballot initiative, otherwise known as psilocybin. Mushrooms are now not that big of a deal in Colorado. I expected this from the state that legalized marijuana first. I love this. I think this is a great idea. There are several testimonies online that you guys can go look up about how psychedelic mushrooms have helped treat depression, have helped treat suicidal thoughts,
PTSD, anxiety,
yeah,
sleep deprivation. Maybe not sleep deprivation, but certain like psychological disorders that we have right now.
I don't think sleep deprivation, but everything else is pretty much on point.
Yeah,
you got to understand here. This is a naturally grown organic piece of vegetation.
That's the same with weed too.
Right, and you know what? I'm pro the legalization of marijuana.
Even heroin or cocaine.
Heroin and cocaine are different, whereas they start as organic life forms.
True.
It's a smoke ton of processing.
True.
It is a giant process to get poppy seeds into opioids. It's a major process to try and get cocoa into cacao and then into either chocolate or cocaine.
Chocolate.
Well, and it's the same plant. You can make
yeah, that's true.
Chocolate out of it. You can make Coca-Cola, or you can make cocaine.
Three valuable options.
Right, and you know what? Honestly, in its natural state, the way ancient civilizations used to use cocoa or cacao, for energy use, or as an energy supplement, rather. I apologize. It was a lot healthier, and it didn't have any of the negative effects cocaine does now. So honestly, if you go back to doing that, it'd be great.
Fun fact, FDR actually was given cocaine by his doctor on Pearl Harbor Day.
I bet he was.
Yeah. Truly give him a burst of energy.
Coming from the same physicians that were like, you should smoke cigarettes. It'll make you lose weight.
They told Teddy Roosevelt that he should smoke cigars to help deal with his asthma.
Yep. These are the physicians of America back in the 1930s.
Well, that was like 1870s or whatever with TR. But anyway, moving on.
You're very technical. I like it. Fact checking me on the spot. Anyways, this mushroom thing, let's talk about it a little bit more. So psilocybin is the drug compound in psychedelic mushrooms that make you do the trip. It is also a Schedule 2, I want to say Schedule 2 drug.
You would have more knowledge on that than I would. I'm not familiar that much with the scheduling of drugs.
I want to say psilocybin's a Schedule 2 drug. Nope, I was wrong. It's Schedule 1. It's a Schedule 1, just like marijuana was a Schedule 1 drug, and heroin's a Schedule 1 drug. Now, this is 2/3 of the 3 most popular Schedule 1 drugs at this point that Colorado has decided to decriminalize and then eventually legalize. Hopefully, mushrooms becomes legal in Colorado. But this does bring me to an interesting point about the scheduling system, which has a lot to do with a man named Harry Anslinger and another man named John Ehrlichman, about 30 years apart politically. One of them's the father of Prohibition. The other worked with President Nixon. Conveniently enough, fun fact about both those men, they both hated Jews. They both hated black people. And Anslinger hated Mexicans. It's kind of funny how the things that people use for recreation at different time periods end up making it into policy because our government wants to subjugate different populations.
Reefer fever.
Yeah, exactly. So pot actually never, ever, ever did any of the things that Harry Anslinger said they would do. And the only reason John Ehrlichman went after it was because of anti-Vietnam protesters using heroin, mushrooms, and pot as a recreational way of having fun. So, yeah, big lie that the government told the people of the United States. Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, none really on that. I was going to go back to the ballot initiative and everything that got this through. I mean, like, it was only passed with a 50.6% of the vote majority. So it only passed by 0.6%, which is really all you need to get it passed. I mean, Denver has the ballot initiative, so do states like California where they're planning to move next with it. Where with these states where it's different than states like our state, like New York, is that ballot initiative states are more likely to follow the public opinion and how the public feels about an issue, where states like New York really depends on how the legislature feels about it. Like Governor Cuomo, for instance, has moved back and forth and flip-flopped on weed, for instance. Yeah. Where before he was against it, saying that, like, oh, it's a gateway drug and everything and all this other stuff. But now once he's read the economic benefits and everything of it, he's now for it. He did the same thing with fracking, too, saying, like, I don't know if I'm against it, I don't know if I'm for it, while taking money from both sides for his first re-election campaign or whatever, or his first campaign. But he also now, since the governor of New York's one of the most powerful governors in the country, they also propose the budget, and then they negotiate over it, and he likes to sneak little things that he doesn't know if he can get through the legislature into the budget, and he does that with weed. He also has done it with the plastic bag ban, I believe. So it's kind of just a way for him to sneak it into the budget. But it kind of just seems like once they legalized weed in Colorado and all these other states are now doing it, it kind of just became like, well, what next? Can they get other drugs that have medical benefits through, or even just other drugs for recreation? It kind of just opened the floodgates for that. So,
well, I'm kind of for the legalization of all drugs, regardless of recreation or medical benefit, even if they're absolutely useless. I think that it's something that the individual needs to decide to do for themselves. If
I wholeheartedly agree with you on that too. I'm just stating like the political aspects of it all.
No, I get you. I'm just saying that when it comes to drugs, especially mushrooms and weed, things that grow out of the ground, it doesn't make sense that they are criminally prosecutable. Like, you're putting people in jail for something that you have no business knowing about them in the first place. And if you want to lower the use of drugs, you should treat it like tobacco, which is you saw an industry of people taking advantage and lying, being crony capitalists and greedy.
So treat it as a health issue rather than a criminal issue.
Right, because then what happened? The Truth Campaign started, and since the Truth Campaign, you've had a lower and lower amount of teenagers and young adults starting to smoke cigarettes. I was a cigarette smoker. I personally could quit anytime. I'm not smoking now. But
Nice job.
yeah, it was very easy for me. Not for everyone, but it was very easy for me.
I mean, I know some people who smoked their way to death too. I mean, so much so that one person I knew was addicted to smoking and later died from it. And then, like, at one point she was in the hospital. She literally thought a tube of toothpaste was a cigarette.
That's wild.
Yeah.
But back on top. I mean, that's very sad and utterly distracting.
But I mean,
However,
another argument with the health thing and legalizing it is, especially with like stuff like weed and or mushrooms, is that nowadays they argue that if you can just go to a pharmacy now, if it's legal, and just get a better dose and less potent dose, because nowadays you get the talk of stuff being too strong coming from the streets or it being laced with stuff. Like, there are stories, like I've heard stories of people smoking weed that I'm not going to say names, of smoking weed that's been like laced with PCP and other stuff like that.
yeah, well, here's the problem, is that because it's not a legal product, you have to trust less than reputable sources to get your fix.
Oh, most definitely.
And that's when you run into the problem of lacing things. Now, by no means do I think that the pharmaceutical industry should get their hands on things like mushrooms or cocaine or heroin, considering that they've abused their right to produce opioids so horribly. But
oh, yeah, I mean, it's now a health risk. Probably one of the biggest health epidemics we had in our country's history.
right, and that's entirely their fault.
I mean, more people have died from opioids in Vietnam.
Really?
Yeah.
That's insane. So that, like, again, we're talking about the same thing here. Now, when it comes to mushrooms, what I'd like to see is obviously having a full legalization of mushrooms and having people being able to grow them and sell them like a product, like any other product. I don't want the mass production of it. I want a consistent quality, hopefully,
So you
or at
want-
least a proper, like, strain change or variety in quality. But no one's ever OD'd on mushrooms to my knowledge.
So you want to make it like somewhat of like what they do with weed now with the dispensaries?
Yes.
Because there are now companies too that are coming up on the stock market too that do weed and everything too.
You mean that manufacture it or grow it? Like, because you can turn it into products, but like
I believe both.
all right. Well, I mean, that's a good thing. That's good. I like the idea that we're experimenting with these in society and how to incorporate them properly into our business structure. I just don't want the same people who abuse the current products we have available to get a hold of them.
Yeah,
Like-
there are several companies that do. Like, one, for example, is like Aurora Cannabis or whatever. Like, there are other companies like Aurora that do like manufacture weed products and or grow them, and then they, like Aurora, for example, is even on the stock market.
Yeah, and that's good for Aurora. That's good for Aurora. That's something that would be very beneficial to have for all these types of products. A proper business that's doing something responsible, that's treating it properly. It's not going to infuse it with extra stuff or try and play with it. Like, for example,
Plus, also, I believe Aurora is Canadian.
well, yeah, there's that too, I guess. The point I'm getting at is it's a good step for the country to take. It's trust in its citizens. It's more personalized and centralized and limiting government and their impact on our daily lives. It allows us to make decisions for ourselves and hold ourselves accountable. And as long as we pair this with beneficial things, like if you get into more hardcore drugs being decriminalized, you can look towards a profitable rehabilitation business or industry. Then again, you'd need to regulate those properly too, because there's a lot of rehabs that aren't functioning things. They suck.
So like you saying that like other programs like AA for these drugs aren't working.
No, there's plenty of programs like AA or rehab that do work. There's just a lot of rehabs that don't work.
Oh, okay.
Like, there's no proper regulation on how to open and operate a rehab. There's no standard to that. We should have a standard to that, a regulatory agency telling people what is a proper rehabilitation procedure, not to invade and stop people from opening them, not to increase barriers to entry, but to say, like, for example, petting horses was an example that they had on the John Oliver show last week tonight, and it worked for like 2 people. Everyone else went back to using heroin. That company is still around. That company hasn't been told they need to stop selling that as proper rehabilitation practices. However, there are plenty of rehabs that do work to get people clean. There are plenty of AA meetings, and
we even have AA on CNS campus.
Yeah, it's here too. It works. It's functional. If you allow that to develop and be properly utilized, then there's no reason to make drugs illegal. The only reason they're illegal in the first place, like we just said, is because some people in a position of power almost 80 years ago, and then again 60 years ago, decided that they didn't like a specific group and they were going to punish them, which is wrong, which is completely wrong. And I don't know how we have this archaic system in 2019 anyway. It's like people just conveniently forgot why it was put there.
Well, I mean, nowadays it's kind of just people are now, I guess, more open to things like this. And so I guess now with all the research that people are able to do on it, I guess people just started to come around to it. Because also it's just started getting popular like a few years ago. Like Colorado legalized weed, I think, in like 2012.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, I think that's just a big factor. People are now just starting to turn to it. And so I think that's what's driving the big change in the view and the laws changing.
I agree. Although again, it's one of those things where it never should have been there. Now we got to go back and fix it. As long as we fix it without creating a new government body to hurt us again, or without letting people run free, you got to find a balance. It'll work well. You could do this with cocaine even. In fact, honestly, if you were to legalize cocaine, just bring it back to the way that it was used way before people turned it into a processed drug.
Yeah, well, I mean, like some of these, like heroin, for instance, was originally sold as medication through Bayer.
Yeah, and same thing with morphine, codeine, which we still use. Heroin's only one chemical compound away from being morphine or codeine. You just add something to it and make it heroin. I don't know the exact chemistry, but it's a relatively simple movement of an atom. I think back in like junior year of high school, it was explained to us, but it's not like we don't have. Yeah, it's not like we don't have an exact thing like that on the drug market now that we use in hospitals. Yeah. And that's kind of where it's silly. It's why is the street version illegal, but the version you can get prescribed not illegal? Why do you have pharmaceutical companies pushing doctors to sell prescriptions for opioids, but yet you wouldn't allow a drug dealer?
Well, that's when you get into like big pharma and healthcare, and that's just a whole entire different animal altogether. I mean, like the whole entire economy of healthcare in the United States is like $2.5 trillion, something like that.
Right.
So, I mean, like, you're just fighting a whole entire different animal with that.
Well, it's all interconnected. The reason that certain drugs are illegal is because of a problem we had in the 30s and then again the late 60s, which was never resolved. And then now you have big pharmaceutical companies which found a way around those drugs and manufactured something remarkably similar and pumped it down our throats to now we have an opioid epidemic.
Yeah, and then also, like, with the different things, like, also one thing I also want to touch on, too, is, like, the difference in the perception of drugs. Because, like, if you look at drugs, like, within pop culture, you look at, like, weed, and you get stuff like Cheech and Chong and everything. Yeah. And if you look at stuff like heroin, you get, like, you don't really get much publicity for heroin in the media. I mean, you get stuff like maybe grunge music, but, like, Kurt Cobain took a bunch of heroin before he committed suicide, so
that's not exactly what I would consider positive media. Just
no, I'm not saying it's positive media. I'm saying grunge was like a lot of people with grunge did heroin. It was very well publicized, so it's kind of just like
I think a lot of
difference in
I think a lot of everybody did it. A lot of like back in the day, before we were around, everyone did heroin. Heroin was a huge problem once already here. That's what the Dare to Resist Drugs thing that Nancy Reagan came out with was about. Was originally
she was
the
just
heroin.
Say No. I don't think she was Dare.
Just Say No and Dare similar. Like not similar, but the Just Say No came first and then Dare started later.
Yeah.
But the whole point about that is it was to fight the original opioid epidemic. It didn't work. It in fact had negative results where people did more drugs because of Dare and because of Just Say No. Preaching abstinence has never been proven to work, especially with Americans. We have that bred into us from being part of this country, that if someone tells you can't do something, you go and do it anyway. That's the whole point.
Yeah, it's in our DNA pretty much.
Yeah, so it doesn't make sense to try and impose that on our culture if every other aspect of our culture is telling us to do the opposite. When you said the media preference of drugs, marijuana is a comedy must nowadays.
Yeah.
In
You just look at Seth Rogen.
Yeah, in movies is the word I'm trying to get out. In movies, it's a comedy must. It's been a must since Cheech and Chong, just like he said.
I mean, Jimmy Kimmel actually has a Mount Rushmore of weed.
Yeah, it's everywhere, and it's regular. It's been regularized. In terms of heroin or cocaine, it's always big drug dealer gangster movies pushing drugs in a negative way. They're
Similar
always
with,
bad guys.
Cocaine.
Yeah, and that's Hollywood making up a thing, but at the same time, it's also the average person doesn't want to hear about how cocaine is not necessarily a pure evil thing, and heroin's not a pure evil thing. These things are just used wrong.
Also, the comedy thing too could also change the way the public perceives weed, because back in the early 20th century, like you were saying, you had stuff like Reefer Fever and all these other somewhat horror films showing to people that got people scared of weed, but nowadays you have people being fed weed as a comedy device.
Yeah, it's all about the media's perception. If people told the truth about heroin and cocaine, the truth would be that if you didn't get it from a shady source, it wouldn't be so dangerous. And if you used it recreationally without using it to excess, then you'd be fine.
I mean, with me, I'm never gonna do drugs myself, but it's kind of just if you choose to do it, just be safe with it.
Yeah, everything in moderation. Cocaine kills you from overdoses. Heroin kills you from overdoses. Overdoses in its name will tell you did too much.
Yeah.
If there was a safe place to purchase a proper product and there was a safe place to do the product under supervision.
Well, they actually do have safe injection sites.
Where?
For heroin. For one's in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And what you do is that you go there and you inject yourself with heroin. And the point being is that they're trying to get you off the drug. And it's more of a health place too, but you can I believe you can get clean needles and everything there too. It's in Philadelphia if you want to do more research into it. And they have Narcan and everything. They have pamphlets and everything for you to take to try to get you off it. And it's kind of just the point being is that if somebody ODs on heroin, they're more likely to be open to trying to get off the drug than somebody who hasn't OD'd on it.
Right. And that's all well and good, but the important part is they have a safe place monitored by a medical professional that they can then receive help and not die.
Yeah,
that's the important part of it. It doesn't matter if they go to rehab or not. Yeah, I would like to see a lot less people on drugs, but if you're going to do drugs, I'm not going to tell you not to do drugs.
Kind of just with heroin, they've already distinguished 3 hotbeds of it across the United States, being New England, Ohio, and Appalachia.
That makes sense. Actually, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, those are the 3 areas of the country that are worse. I remember when I first went to Philadelphia, this isn't one of the hot zones. The first thing I ever got introduced to in Philadelphia was when we stepped out the car to go to the St. Francis Inn for a school trip to go work at the St. Francis Inn, a kind of a homeless soup kitchen shelter in Philadelphia. Was when we got out of the car, we just got first thing we saw was a Snapple bottle full of heroin needles.
Sweet.
Yeah, that was the first thing we saw in Philadelphia.
All right. Well, on that completely depressing note, we're gonna have to end tonight's show. Thank you so much for staying with us. It's rounding out 12 p.m. And I appreciate you guys embracing our new hour-long platform, embracing our new time, and embracing Justin and I as hosts. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, follow us on YouTube, email us for any comments, post under our YouTube show for any comments, and reach out to us any way you can. We want to hear from you. We want your opinions on things. It's not fun when it's just the two of us. One last update before we go. We are starting the Summer of Rights in 2 weeks. So that means is after next week's show, there's going to be one more reminder. And then the following week will be the First Amendment. We're going to do it on censorship. So how the First Amendment applies to censorship. And we're going to cover that. And then every week afterward, it's going into 2A, then the Third Amendment, then Fourth, Fifth, so on. You get the point. So stay tuned for that, all right? So thank you so much.
Hope you enjoyed.
This has been Calling Out Controversy.